Well, I think it's probably true to say that tax compliance has never been more important. If you look at the increasingly complex regulatory environment, not just the attention of tax authorities, which obviously are very interested in compliance with the issue of public deficits and so on, but also other regulators. We see the EU bringing country-by-country reporting rules, and non-governmental organisations, the charities, the international aid organisations, questioning the contribution of corporates to the countries in which they operate. You see a world where getting your compliance right is absolutely essential. And you also have fast-moving business organisations moving into new markets, adopting new business models, looking at the transformation of their finance function for greater efficiency. All of that at the same time is making compliance harder. Well, undoubtedly, how you source compliance, you've got to have a strategy around it, because compliance is a given. You can't not do it. It's the law wherever you operate. You have to submit your compliance filing. So the question is not whether you source, it's how you source, in my view. And I think the reality is what we see is all companies are going to adopt what I would call a co-sourcing strategy. And there's a couple of different facets to that. I think what we see is where companies have a big presence in a country and they've got the in-house teams that can handle compliance. You know, we see a lot, not all of them, deciding to do their compliance in-house. But for those 80% of their entities or the countries in which they operate where they don't have that in-house expertise, they will look for a service provider, a partner, to help them do that. They'll want that local expertise to help them handle their compliance. So that's one aspect of co-sourcing. You know, sometimes it may be in-house, but the majority of their work will be with a service provider. The other aspect is how much compliance you pass to your service provider. You know, if you think of the tax return, you may, in some cases, say, well, I'd rather have a review of our internally prepared return, or we might say, do the whole thing through the service provider. But increasingly, we're seeing a trend as well to other aspects of compliance. So indirect tax compliance or statutory accounting compliance is coming into the scope of the services that are being requested. So that aspect of co-sourcing as well. Yes, there will be different circumstances and different organisations that will determine the choice they make. But I think this distinction between outsourcing and co-sourcing is actually probably a false distinction in my view, and it's a point I often make when I talk to companies about this, because I think when you think of the compliance process, what companies want from their service provider is the expert input, making sure that the tax return or the statutory accounts are correctly prepared. What they don't want is an accounting clerk checking the underlying numbers. Those underlying numbers sit with the company, but getting to those numbers, understanding that they're correct, is a really important part of the end-to-end compliance process. Without the right numbers, you can't make the right disclosures. So that's why I like to use the word co-sourcing. It always has to be a partnership between the service provider and the company if you want a really effective end-to-end compliance process. The growth in demand for compliance support in the last few years has been quite remarkable. I mean, it's always been there. Companies have always wanted support, but the growth in demand for support on a regional or global basis from a single service provider has been the real change in the last few years. We've tracked over 450 separate competitive tenders over the last 3 to 4 years, so running, you know, roughly one a month, and each of those from major multinational corporations. So that explosion, you know, that's really an explosion in demand in my view. Given the amount of demand that we've seen for services organised in this way, I think you can say this is the new normal for compliance for multinational organisations. I don't think they're going back to the days when they sought to manage lots of individual advisor relationships in whatever countries they operated. That just takes too much management time. It doesn't allow them to get the standardisation and the information flow that they need from the compliance process. So I think the new normal is single service providers across a region or across the globe, so that they can have a partner, as I've said, on their journey towards better compliance.